Welcome to GreenTV. My name is Tom Brown. I'm your host for today's show. The St. Joe Valley Greens meet on the second Thursday evening of each month. Our meetings are 7 p.m. in the Malloy Room in the basement of the St. Joseph County Public Library, downtown South Bend. We hope you'll visit us soon. Who do citizens go to with complaints about police behavior? Who has the authority and power to control the police? Minority groups often complain of disrespectful and abusive treatment by the police. Where can their complaints be heard? Mel de Guzman is an assistant professor at Indiana University at South Bend, where he studies police behavior and community oversight of the police. De Guzman received a PhD in criminal justice in 2001 from the University of Cincinnati. His dissertation was on the integrity, legitimacy, effectiveness, and impact of civilian review boards. Dr. de Guzman lectured at the Philippine National Police College and at the Indiana Police Corps in Plainfield, Indiana. Dr. de Guzman has unique experience with community oversight of the police. He was the secretary of the Senate committee primarily responsible for writing the legislation which reorganized the Philippine National Police and which strengthened citizen review of the police there. Typically, the police resist citizen control. As Dr. de Guzman says, the police were ready to shoot at us. Please stay tuned for part 2, Who Controls the Police? The Case for Civilian Review.
Why do we need a citizen review board? In most jurisdictions, citizen review came about as a consequence of tragic events, highlighting the abuses, corruption, and insensitivities of the police. These bad experiences with the police are legitimate reasons for establishing a review board. However, we should not wait for tragic events or moments of unrest before we create citizen review boards. There is a fundamental reason why we should establish the board even without the existence of apparent problems with the police. And that is, we are a democracy. The American democratic way is that people should be able to control their government. You see, the police are unique. A renowned police expert, whose name is Egon Bittner, once called the police as anomalies in a democratic society. He said that they represent the ultimate power of government over its citizens, and it is the only agency that is authorized to use coercive force. He added that they exist in a society where the use of force is discouraged. Ordinary people like us are expected to settle our disputes in a pacific way or a peaceful way, and yet the police are licensed to come in to settle disorder with the use of force. That's why I call them an anomaly. We want to have a control over this governmental agency in order to keep it in check. This is the American way of life. This makes civilian review a legitimate control mechanism. Therefore, in response to the other questions, and the first one is, do citizens have a legitimate role in overseeing the police? My answer is a categorical yes. Aside from what I have already outlined as the reason for the citizen review's existence, this affirmative answer is also driven by another factor, and that is community policing. Community policing has been the major thrust over the last 20 years of police departments. Most scholars agree that the last 15 years have ushered in innovative means in trying to engage the community in the promotion of law and order. Yes, we have seen the dramatic increase of community policing programs all over the country. Partly responsible for this growth of community policing programs are federal monies available for community policing. Community policing programs have been implemented also due to academic advocacy regarding the new paradigm in policing strategy, which is community policing. A ton of research has been produced over the last decade focusing on community policing. However, the community policing revolution neglected a very important component, and that is accountability and control. I believe that if we want communities to significantly influence the future state of law and order, they should have an instrument to enforce their demands to the police. It has been shown by research that police officers will choose to act on their preferred role, which is what they want to do, rather than their prescribed role, and that is what they are required by law or procedures to do. And this was done in a research in the mid-1990s by Crank and Langworthy. This means that sometimes police officers do not perform their expected roles due to several reasons. Maybe because it is inconvenient for them, or simply because they do not believe in them. When that happens, citizens are left with poor police service, which may even include police misconduct. Without citizen review, community members will not be empowered, and they become a subordinate partner in a police-community relations or police-community partnership. Citizen review is the strongest manifestation of citizen participation in government. Setting up a citizen review should not be interpreted, however, as that the police are corrupt, or our police are abusive, or insensitive, or even ineffective. A police organization is not entirely staffed by people who are corrupt, abusive, insensitive, or just plain idiots. I could simply say that only perhaps 5% of these officers in any department are not good officers or not good cops. There's only a very little number that we have to deal with. But should this fact that very few officers may be considered bad negate the creation of citizen review? I think not. Think of it this way. It has been claimed that in any community or city, about 90% of the population in that city are law-abiding people. Yet the government sets up agencies such as the police to constantly check on the misbehavior of the 10% in our midst who are not law-abiding. In the process, even the 90% of us, I include myself because I've never been arrested, maybe after tonight, even the 90% who are honest receive the same scrutiny from the police. Right? Those of us who are honest are sometimes being checked, being investigated, even if we are the most honest people on earth. Sometimes, similarly, we should have the mechanism that would be there when the police steps out of bounds, even if most of them act within the boundaries of good behavior. So why do we need civilian review? I would like you to reflect on this question. The question is, can we trust the police to police themselves? If your answer is no, then you need an external review of their actions. But why can we not allow them to police themselves? There are several reasons why. As I said earlier, our democratic ideal of government control is the primary reason. Citizen review is a manifestation of an effective semblance of control. More importantly, we are guided by empirical considerations when deciding on external control of the police. We know, and some of us have heard, about research regarding the blue curtain. Okay, that there is a secrecy behind every police department. We also know about theories in policing that says they have close camaraderie and a mentality of us versus them. Peter Manning also came up with what he called as manipulation of appearances. that police are engaged in. It's not necessarily bad, okay? But sometimes they do actions that are not really related to being effective, but simply they do it simply because they show that they are effective. Okay? And I've already told you about the research that given a choice to whether to perform their prescribed role and their preferred role, they will choose the latter. In other words, the police have so much latitude, including doing their work most of the time unsupervised, most of the time outside of the public view. And therefore, it is easy for them to be tempted to deny justice to a legitimate complaint if they are the ones handling the complaint. Therefore, we need citizen review. The next and more important question is, do citizens have the capacity to make judgments about the professional conduct or competence of the police? I will also answer this question in the affirmative. If we look at the sustained rate of citizen review side by side with internal affairs, the conviction rate of citizen reviews is way below the conviction rate of internal affairs. Most research also shows that civilian review boards are less punitive than internal affairs. Is this low conviction rate a manifestation of lack of competence? If you are against citizen review, you would say, yes, they lack competence, so they cannot convict. If you're on the opposite side, you could use this information to argue the fact that citizen reviews are more cautious in the exercise of their powers, and therefore they cannot have a higher sustained rate. However, let me give you some evidences for the competence of citizens to review police actions. In England, police officers initially opposed citizen review because they thought civilians are incompetent to understand the unique characteristics of a police work. Several years later, a scholar named Young interviewed police officers as well as examined their perceptions about the competence of civilian reviews. Majority of those who were interviewed thought that citizen review boards were competent, thorough, and fair in their adjudication of cases. This is also true with the Citizen Review Board in the Philippines, where I did extensive studies on their civilian review called the People's Law Enforcement Board. When the People's Law Enforcement Board was being proposed, police officers rallied against it and claimed ordinary citizens are incompetent to adjudicate complaints. When I did my study in the year 2000, I inquired into both complainants and police perception about the board, and among other things, I found that both of these clients were generally satisfied with the Civilian Review Board. As a matter of fact, police officers were more satisfied than complainants in this study that I did. This change of heart among police officers regarding the competence of the board is also true in the experiences of U.S. police departments, such as in New York, in Philadelphia, and in Berkeley. Again, think of it this way. If we could trust a jury to determine the fate of a person accused of a crime, why can't we trust civilians to judge fairly the actions of police officers? I believe the question should be, who could handle complaints against the police more legitimately? And the answer is obvious, the citizens themselves. The next question that I want to go into is that, who establishes civilian review boards? There are two ways that civilian review boards have been created primarily. One is through legislative action, and by legislative action I would include a council passing legislation, or maybe a form of direct legislation such as an initiative or referendum. And the other means of establishing a citizen review is through executive action, one where the city mayor creates an office to have an oversight over the police. As for me, I would prefer a legislative board, one that is created through legislation. This route gives the board more legitimacy, and it will also insulate the board from undue pressure from the executive. The board should not be subject, I believe, to the whims of the executive, which might happen when it is created through executive action. Furthermore, we want a board that is institutionalized rather than one that is dependent on the whims of the executive. So rather than dwell on too much on the who, I will tackle some of the issues on the process. That is, how should we go about establishing a civilian review board? Thus, I wish to outline some initial steps toward the formation of civilian review. And the first step should be a determination of what model is best suited for South Bend. We should be able to convince ourselves on the following issues and consolidate ourselves around these issues. One is the composition. Okay. Do we want all police officers in there? Do we want civilians and police together? Or do we want a civilian monitor in that civilian review? The second is membership selection. Should the members be elected or appointed? If we appoint, who should make the appointments? Should it be the mayor, the council, community leaders? Most models adopt an appointment and what they call as confirmation process, which means the mayor appoint members and then they go through the council for confirmation. Sometimes appointments are made in consultation with community leaders and the police unions or organizations of police such as the FOP. In the Indianapolis Review Board, the Citizen Police Complaints Board adopts the previously outlined procedure. That is, the mayor appoints, they go through the council, and in consultation with some leaders, they make the confirmation process. What are the criteria for selection? That should also be very clear. Okay. Should we allow former police officers in there, retired military officers, or should they have legal knowledge, or they could be an ordinary Joe? All right. As powers and function is concerned, we should decide whether to give them full powers, limited powers, or ministerial powers. A civilian monitor has ministerial powers. They just receive complaints, make referrals, and that's the end of their job. A civilian review has full powers. Okay. We should also allocate which of these members should have voting powers. See, membership of the board all over the country can reach up to as high as 12. Okay. Indianapolis has as much as 12. Okay. Some civilian reviews have 6. Some have 5. Okay. So it's up to us or you to decide how many members you should have in there. In arriving at answer to these questions, however, I would suggest the following steps. First, you should conduct a cross-sectional survey of police and community as to how they feel about the civilian review, what they think the composition of that review board should be, and the powers of those review boards. And after that, I think they should form a study group that would analyze all of this information, given the local conditions of South Bend. And the third step that you need to do is to formulate legislations for possible enactment in council or for referendum. They need proposals from high-profile organizations such as yours for the recommendations or the proposals to move. I'm not precluding eventual findings about citizen review in South Bend, but here are some good practices I would like to do. I would like to divide these good practices into 2, structures and procedures. For structural considerations, I would say that a hybrid seems to work well when there is high tension between the police and the public. A hybrid where police is represented and the public is represented. A monitor works well when there is a cordial police-community relationship, meaning you don't have a severe problem with police-community relationship, you can have a ministerial civilian review. And a civilian review works best when there is rampant misconduct in the police department. We don't want the civilian review to be sabotaged or to be manipulated by the police, and we want them out of the review process. What are the good practices when it comes to procedural considerations? Number one, you should have good information and communication with the parties involved. This is very important. Clients of the board should be constantly informed of the progress of their case. When a decision is made, the decision should be accompanied by an explanation as to the reasons for the decision. Don't just say you're guilty, that's it, case closed, all right? There should be a completeness of the file. There should be thoroughness. This requires rigid observance of rules. Shortcuts and summary proceedings will compromise thoroughness. And so you should make sure that all the procedures are done before you make a decision. In several of the studies that I've made, police officers will accept any decision, whether it's a guilty conviction or otherwise, as long as the process has been observed. There should be efforts to obtain all witnesses and all relevant materials to the case. And this is where subpoena power is very important. The fourth one is fairness. When you are trying to investigate a case, do not ask hostile questions. Make sure that you don't ask leading questions, and make sure that you don't unnecessarily lend credibility to any testimonies before the case is decided on. And the last one is timeliness. And this is an important factor. The longer the process, the more agitated the parties become. Complaint investigations should be completed in a timely manner. The review board should have a set of goals and timetables for completing investigation. In my research, I found that it is not the length of time that matters, but whether the length of time that the board took was within the expectations of the parties or within the norms of ordinary cases. And finally, no, not yet, about 3 more topics. What are the measures of success? Okay. How do we know that we are doing well? There are 4 measures of success. One is the number of complaints. And we know that complaints is problematic, okay? Because we can say that if the number of complaints is high, we are saying the police are not being deterred by civilian review or citizen review, and therefore it's not effective. Okay? But at the same time, it could be also interpreted as the civilian review are doing very well, therefore they have less complaints in their possession or on their table. The other one is conviction rate. Okay. But again, conviction rate is problematic because a high conviction rate doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing very well or that they're very competent. It may be that the evidence against the police officers are really, really overwhelming. I would suggest that you take a look at the possibility of concentrating more on the last 2 measures of success, and that is client satisfaction as well as learning. Okay. And client satisfaction has been a problem for me when I presented my dissertation. They said, you're going to have a problem with this because it will co-vary with another factor, and that is the outcome of the case. It is human nature that if you lose a case, that you feel bitter about anything. Okay? The people in the board, the procedures, everything. Okay? And that was my apprehension too when I started doing my dissertation. And I said, well, let's try it. Okay. And to my surprise, satisfaction did not co-vary with outcome of the case. Okay. They vary with other factors such as integrity, the legitimacy of the board, the efficiency of the board. And the last one that I want you to seriously take a look at is learning. And what is learning? Learning is when the board's decision becomes a basis for policy by the police department. Meaning, because of what you have decided on, the police have learned something. They changed their policy and they said, we want to make our police department better. We're going to follow the recommendations of the Citizen Review Board. When that happens, I think that's one of the most important measure of success that we could have. Let me conclude by outlining the challenges ahead of us here in South Bend. Surveying the history of the different citizen review boards, citizen review is most primarily a byproduct of some social or community uprising brought about by police misconduct. Okay. Cities like New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, among others, created citizen reviews in response to rampant police misconduct. In the history of other countries, it showed that citizens' reviews were created also to address police misconduct. In South Bend, we should not wait for an upheaval. Social unrest are not brought about by one incident, but by perceived lack of control of the police. Citizen review boards can act as a buffer that will probably prevent most of these unrest. We should put the solution ahead of the problem. South Bend needs to empower its citizens through their increased participation in the control of the police. I think this would not be a hard sell for city and police officials. South Bend declares itself as a community policing agency, and I believe a mechanism that increases citizen participation in policing, such as citizen review, should always be welcome. Citizen review will most likely be opposed by some, if not majority, of the officers of South Bend. This police opposition is a normal course in the history of civilian review. It is a normal reaction by the police. Police officers are always apprehensive of things that brings uncertainties to their jobs. Civilian review is only one of those that may be considered as contributory to this uncertainty. This is the reason why the police oppose it. And this is true anywhere in the world. And as previously mentioned, I worked for the Senate Committee on National Defense in my home country. When we were trying to reorganize the police, they were ready to shoot at us because we were introducing civilian review. Police were against it. They held rallies and demonstrations to voice their objections to it. They believe, the police officers in my home country, believe that citizens cannot be trusted to adjudicate their cases. This was also true in the United Kingdom, Australia, and even here in the United States. As I pointed out, it happened in New York, it happened in Philadelphia, and in some other cities in the United States. However, do not be discouraged by these challenges. Police officers are rational human beings. In most jurisdictions, the police hated citizen review initially, but they loved it in the end. That's the history of policing in this country and civilian review board in this country.
Big like an ocean, or a mud like a mountain.
However, do not be discouraged by these challenges. Police officers are rational human beings. In most jurisdictions, the police hated citizen review initially, but they loved it in the end. That's the history of policing in this country and civilian review board in this country. In other words, the history of most civilian reviews or citizen review boards turned out fairly well. And I'm sure it will be more than well in the city of South Bend. Thank you very much.